The courtroom was quiet, but not respectful. It was the kind of quiet that masks judgment, murmurs under breath, side eyes, smug smirks. I stood there in full dress uniform, my posture square, boots polished, medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The judge hadn't even looked up yet. The bailiff had barely concealed a chuckle. But it was the officer seated near the witness stand that finally broke the tension. Didn't know Halloween came early, he muttered loud enough for half the room to hear. His partner snorted. What's that supposed to be, a costume or a cry for attention? I didn't flinch. Years of deployments, missions I can't talk about, and service far from any camera had trained my nerves into steel. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a courtroom in the middle of a small county I had hoped to quietly visit, settling a matter for my niece. The judge glanced up. Still nothing said. I'm Lieutenant General Maurice Langston, U.S. Army, I said, calmly. I'm here under subpoena. Representing my family. That should have been enough. But the cop smirked. Sure you are, General. All kinds of folks claim to be all kinds of things these days, he said, leaning back in his chair. I glanced at the judge. Still no correction, no order. Just passive silence. That's when I took out my phone. I tapped the screen deliberately. No rush, no panic, just precision. The kind of calm that unsettles people who expect you to fold. The officer leaned forward, now openly amused. What, calling in backup? You gonna phone the Pentagon? I didn't answer him. The line rang once. Colonel Weiss, came the voice on the other end. Sir, this is General Langston. I need verification pushed through to this jurisdiction. I'm in court. I paused, locking eyes with the officer. Mistaken for a fraud. Silence. Then, understood. Stand by. They'll get the confirmation in under 60 seconds. I hung up. For a moment, nothing happened. The officer grinned again like he'd won something. Thought so, he said. Just another guy bluffing. That's when a phone on the judge's bench lit up. A vibration. Then another. The judge looked down, expecting something mundane. But his face changed. His eyes squinted. His mouth parted slightly, like he was reading something he wasn't prepared for. Then the court clerk's phone buzzed. The bailiff's radio crackled. And just like that, the entire room shifted. The officer's smug grin faded fast. Sir, the judge finally said, voice lower now, would you mind approaching the bench? I stepped forward slowly, my boots echoing across the marble. I could feel the room tighten behind me, as if everyone collectively realized they'd underestimated the wrong man. As I reached the bench, the judge leaned in, suddenly deferential. General Langston, he said carefully, we've just received confirmation through federal lines. You are indeed who you say you are. And then some. He swallowed, clearly uncomfortable. The courtroom, moments earlier filled with tension and ridicule, had fallen into a strange hush. I could feel the officer's eyes burning into my back. I'm sorry for the, confusion, the judge added, glancing sideways at the officer who had mocked me. The cop quickly looked down, his earlier swagger erased. I gave a slight nod but said nothing. Behind me, the bailiff adjusted his stance and whispered something to the clerk. She turned pale, looked at me, then at the officer, and started typing something into her terminal with urgency. Then the door to the courtroom opened. A tall woman in a dark blue federal suit entered briskly, flashing a badge. I'm with Army CID liaison, she said. I was dispatched 2 minutes ago. I'm here to ensure General Langston receives the respect and recognition he is due, and to address any incident reports involving court personnel. The room turned to stone. Even the hum of the ceiling fan felt louder. The officer who mocked me? He froze in place. His jaw tensed. He wasn't grinning anymore. I didn't have to say a word. That one call did what years of silent service had taught me: real authority doesn't shout. It shows up, and the room listens. The federal agent turned to the judge. We've reviewed the live courtroom feed. The remarks made toward General Langston were not only inappropriate, they may constitute grounds for a formal misconduct report. We'll be speaking with your officer momentarily. The judge stammered. I wasn't aware. You were present, she said sharply, not raising her voice. And you allowed it. The officer who mocked me tried to stand up, maybe to explain, maybe to retreat, but the agent cut him off with a look. You will remain seated until instructed otherwise. He sat fast. I finally broke my silence. I didn't come here to make trouble, I said, addressing the room, calm and deliberate. I came because I was subpoenaed. I wore the uniform out of respect for the process, not to impress anyone. But respect goes both ways. A few people shifted in their seats, embarrassed now. The same clerk who laughed earlier refused to look up. The judge nodded. General Langston, I offer you a formal apology on behalf of this court. I'm not here for apologies, I said. I'm here for my niece. And I won't let any of your staff intimidate or humiliate her in my presence. The federal agent turned back to the officer. We'll be taking your statement in private. And if what we've reviewed holds up, Internal Affairs will be notified. He nodded, but his face was pale now. The bravado was long gone. I walked back to the bench where I had been told to sit earlier. But this time, no one laughed. No one dared breathe too loud. The room had learned what one phone call, and one earned uniform, could really do. The judge cleared his throat and moved the proceedings forward, but the tone had changed entirely. The courtroom wasn't just quiet now, it was reverent. Every word was measured, every gesture cautious. The arrogance that had filled the room an hour ago had evaporated into the carpet. I sat beside my niece, Kendra. Her case was small, a property dispute involving a landlord who tried to evict her unlawfully while she was recovering from surgery. She looked at me, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. Uncle M.O., what just happened? I gave her a faint smile. Just reminded a few people what respect looks like. The judge reviewed the case materials with a sudden urgency to do everything strictly by the book. No glances, no commentary, no delays. When he ruled in Kendra's favor, it wasn't out of pity, it was out of fear of further scrutiny. As we stood to leave, the same officer who had mocked me earlier stepped forward, face red with tension. General, he said, avoiding my eyes, didn't know. That was the problem, I replied simply. And it's not just me. You should think about who else you dismiss without knowing. He nodded quickly, words failing him. Outside the courthouse, the air was cooler. Brighter. Kendra walked beside me, still stunned. I didn't know you had people like that on speed dial. Didn't need them until today, I said. But I keep them close for moments just like this. We reached my car, government-plated, parked without ticket or hassle. And as I opened the door for her, I said, "You're not alone, Kendra. Never have been. Some people just need to be reminded who's watching." We drove in silence for a few miles. Kendra stared out the window, thoughtful. Then she said, "You didn't have to do all that for me." I glanced at her. Yes, I did. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "I think they were more scared of the truth than the uniform." Maybe, I said. But sometimes the uniform is what forces them to see the truth. My phone buzzed. A short message from the CID liaison, filed. Internal review pending. Will update. I tucked the phone away. I didn't need follow-ups. I didn't need press or a headline. I just needed my niece to know that she wasn't invisible, not today, not ever. Back at her apartment, she hugged me tight. "You didn't raise your voice once," she whispered. You don't have to raise your voice when you know who you are, I said. Let them shout. Let them mock. Power doesn't panic. She nodded, a little stronger now. As I walked back to the car, the courtroom moment replayed in my mind, the laughter, the doubt, the sudden shift. A room full of people had learned something that day. That respect isn't asked for. It's earned, worn, and, when necessary, demanded without saying a word. 3 days later, I received a call. General Langston. The voice was tight. Civil, careful. This is Chief Ramsey, Internal Affairs Division. We've concluded a preliminary inquiry regarding the incident in the courtroom. I let him speak. The officer involved has been placed on administrative leave. There will be a full conduct review. The judge is being evaluated by the State Judicial Oversight Board due to failure to maintain decorum and allow discriminatory behavior in a courtroom setting. He paused, waiting for a reaction. Understood, I said. Keep me informed. He cleared his throat. General, off the record, a lot of us saw the footage. Your restraint, that was powerful. It wasn't restraint, I replied. It was discipline. There's a difference. When the call ended, I sat at my desk, staring at the medals that lined the shelf above, tokens of service, none of which had ever felt as necessary as that single moment in a small-town courthouse. Later that evening, I received a letter from Kendra. She'd slipped it under my door while I was out. Uncle M.O., they taught me about heroes in school. But no one ever told me they walk into courtrooms quietly and change everything with a single phone call. Thank you for showing me what strength really looks like. I folded the note gently. Because sometimes, the loudest echoes come from the quietest moments, and the deepest impact doesn't make a sound. By the end of the week, the footage had leaked. Not by me. I never spoke to a reporter, never posted a thing. But someone in that courtroom, maybe a clerk, maybe a paralegal, couldn't keep it to themselves. A grainy clip hit a local forum first. Then a regional news station picked it up. Courtroom silenced after man mocked for uniform turns out to be U.S. Army General, the headline didn't mention names. But the comments section lit up. People argued over whether it was real. Others who had served chimed in. Veterans recognized the bars, the medals, the stillness in my voice. They didn't need proof. They already knew. I received a call from the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office. They were flooded with press inquiries. You want us to make a statement, sir? No, I said. Let the silence speak. But the silence didn't last. An op-ed appeared in a national paper. When authority is quiet and arrogance is loud, why that courtroom moment matters. Then came emails. Hundreds of them. From soldiers. From parents. From strangers. From people who'd sat in rooms like that, overlooked, underestimated, dismissed, and who now had language for what they always felt. One message stood out. I've never worn a uniform, sir. But I work in a place where people laugh before they listen. Your story changed how I walk into that building now. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with a gavel. Sometimes, it walks in, calm and composed, and lets the world adjust itself. It was a month later when I saw him again. Detective Calvin Reese, the officer who scoffed at me in court, requested a meeting through the Internal Affairs liaison. Voluntary. Unofficial. Off the record. I agreed. Not for closure. But because real change only happens when people are made to face what they'd rather forget. We met in a small, neutral conference room inside the same courthouse. This time, he was out of uniform. No badge. No sidearm. Just a man in a collared shirt and slacks, holding a folder in his lap like it might protect him. He stood when I walked in. I didn't shake his hand. General Langston, he said. I appreciate you coming. I nodded but said nothing. He sat again, hands trembling slightly. "I've watched the footage about a dozen times. At first, I tried to convince myself you were just another guy with connections. But, that wasn't it." He paused. "You didn't react. That's what I keep thinking about. You didn't get loud. You didn't get angry. You just made a call, and the whole room changed." He opened the folder and pushed it across the table. Inside was a formal letter, handwritten. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted to acknowledge that I disrespected your rank, your service, and your dignity. And not just yours, anyone who's ever been in your position and been dismissed without reason." I read it silently. The words were stiff, but honest. And for the first time, he looked like a man who truly understood the cost of ignorance. "I'm not here to ruin your life," I said. "That was never the point." He nodded. "But next time you feel that instinct, to smirk, to belittle, I hope you remember how quickly the room turned. Not because of who I knew, but because of who I was the whole time." His eyes were glassy now. "I do. I will." As I stood to leave, he didn't try to follow. He just sat there, quiet, thoughtful, smaller than before. Some lessons are loud. Others sit with you like weight on your chest. This one, he'd carry for the rest of his life. 2 months later, I was invited to speak at West Point. I don't do speeches often, not because I can't, but because most people want stories that make them feel good about patriotism without asking too much of their conscience. But this request was different. The topic was silent leadership, authority without noise. I stood at the podium, looking out at rows of young cadets, some wide-eyed, some restless, some skeptical. I saw versions of myself in that crowd, back when I thought authority had to shout to be heard. "I'm not here to tell you how to win wars," I began. "You've got instructors for that. I'm here to tell you how to stand in a room that doubts you, and make that room fall silent without ever raising your voice." I told them the story. Not every detail, but enough. The smirk. The courtroom. The phone call. The shift. The silence. And the echo that came after. You won't always have stripes. You won't always have a badge. Sometimes, all you'll have is who you are. And if you've earned that, truly earned it, it will speak for you louder than any shout. When I finished, the room didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. They stood. Slowly. Quietly. And they remained standing until I left the stage. That was all I needed. Later, I visited Kendra. She had framed my photo in her entryway, not in uniform, but the one of me walking out of that courtroom, head high, eyes steady. She looked at it and smiled. "That's the one," she said. "That's the day everything changed." I nodded. Not just for me. Because sometimes, the moment that silences one room, awakens 100 more. Weeks passed. The story might have quieted down in headlines, but its effects were only just beginning to unfold behind the scenes. An email from a retired Air Force colonel landed in my inbox. "General Langston, I was in the courtroom gallery that day. I didn't speak up, and I regret it. But I've since joined a task force for courtroom decorum standards statewide. We're drafting policy to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen again, to anyone." Another came from a junior defense attorney in Louisiana. "Your story reminded me why I went to law school. I printed the article and taped it above my desk. Thank you for showing that strength doesn't always roar." But it wasn't the emails or media that struck me most, it was what happened at a local high school near that courthouse. A teacher there invited me to speak during Veterans Appreciation Week. I declined at first. Thought it would just be a parade of flag-waving and half-listening students. But she sent me a message that changed my mind. One of our seniors, a kid who's always quiet, always overlooked, stood up during a mock trial last week. When the others laughed at him, he pulled out a folded article about you. Said, "Respect doesn't depend on your voice. It depends on your presence. They stopped laughing. I agreed to visit. When I arrived, the school gym was packed. No stage. No mic. Just rows of chairs and curious faces. I didn't give a speech. I walked among them and told the truth, about how people will look past you, until they can't. About the power of not responding to mockery with anger. About how silence, when earned, can feel louder than thunder. Afterward, the quiet kid came up to me. "Sir," he said, "I want to go into service one day." "You already started," I told him. "The moment you made them listen without shouting." Months later, Kendra stood in front of a full auditorium. It wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't about her old landlord or the legal mess that brought me into that small-town drama. This time, it was a leadership panel hosted at a nearby university, and she was the closing speaker. I sat in the third row, anonymous in the crowd. No uniform. No medals. Just family. She wore a sharp navy blazer, hair tied back, notes in hand, but she didn't need them. When she stepped to the podium, her voice was steady. "You all know me as someone who won a housing rights case," she said. "But what you don't know is that I almost walked away from that fight. I almost let the system convince me that being quiet meant being weak." She paused, scanning the crowd. Then one man walked into a courtroom, not to yell, not to threaten, but to stand. A quiet wave moved through the room. My uncle didn't raise his voice. He didn't swing back. He didn't need to. Because when you know your worth, the room adjusts. And when others see you stand in silence, they remember how to stand themselves. I looked around. Some were leaning forward. Others sat perfectly still. But no one was distracted. She had them. She had me. Kendra finished with a quote I once told her, never realizing she held on to it: "Let others speak loudly. Let them demand attention. You make the room fall quiet when you walk in, and stay quiet when you leave." They rose to their feet before she stepped down. And as she walked off the stage, she looked straight at me in the crowd and smiled. Full circle. Without a single raised voice.